This video is supported by Skillshare. On April 14, 1981, NASA's Space Shuttle Columbia completed its first successful flight, marking a new era of reusable space exploration. But the spacecraft you see here is in California in 1981, and it isn't even American. This is Kazakhstan in 1988, where the Soviet Union launched its own spaceplane, the Buran. The resemblance to the American shuttle was unmistakable. Same shape, same colors, and many assumed it was an outright copy. The real mystery was how the Soviets had managed to catch up so quickly to a program that had taken the United States over a decade and billions of dollars to develop. The two nations had been in constant competition in space since the 1950s. The Soviets stunned the world with Sputnik, the first satellite, while the Americans turned the tide by landing on the moon. But there were also moments of cooperation, like the Apollo-Soyuz project in 1975, when astronauts and cosmonauts shared space for a week. Still, the rivalry dominated. In 1974, at a Kremlin meeting, Leonid Smirnov, head of the Soviet Military-Industrial Commission, warned Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev that the Americans were working on a winged vehicle called the Space Shuttle. Smirnov suggested it might not just be for exploration. If it could shift orbits and hover over Moscow, it could carry nuclear weapons. Alarmed, Brezhnev ordered an immediate response. The Soviets would build their own shuttle, more advanced if possible. Enormous sums of money were funneled into what became Project Buran. The Soviet Union had immense scientific resources and the famous OKB design bureaus, but they faced one problem. They were years behind. They first considered reviving an old 1960s project called Spiral, a reusable mini spaceplane, but it was clearly inferior to what NASA was doing. To compete, they needed hard data. Fortunately for them, much of NASA's work was not secret. Design papers, technical reports, and test results were stored in early online databases available for purchase. The challenge was sorting through mountains of information and delivering it to engineers. That's where the KGB stepped in. Vladimir Vetrov, a senior KGB officer with years of experience in France, oversaw much of the espionage. The Soviets sought data on the shuttle's airframe, heat shield, computers, propulsion, and flight systems. At the Soviet Chamber of Commerce in Moscow, analysts combed through U.S. databases, noting catalog numbers of useful reports. Then, KGB agents in Washington would casually visit the government printing office, request the documents by number, pay a small fee, and leave with valuable information. These weren't stolen in the cloak and dagger sense. They were public, but obscure. The trick was smuggling them back without arousing suspicion. The Soviets routed the data electronically through Vienna and Helsinki before forwarding it to Moscow, where printing rooms ran day and night producing copies. Engineers were thrilled with what they received. Among the most critical finds was NASA's wind tunnel data, which allowed the Soviets to skip years of expensive aerodynamic testing and simply copy the shuttle's proven design. That's why Buran looked almost identical to Columbia. It wasn't laziness, it was efficiency born from espionage. This wasn't the first time the Soviets had borrowed designs from abroad. In the 1960s, they reverse-engineered elements of the Concorde to produce their own supersonic jetliner, the Tu-144. But now, with access to computer networks, their reach was even greater. For several years, thousands of technical papers flowed steadily into Moscow, giving Soviet engineers the tools to accelerate development. Eventually, however, American intelligence caught on. By the early 1980s, the CIA realized how much was being siphoned off. President Ronald Reagan quickly limited Soviet access to technical databases, but it was already too late. The Soviets had collected thousands of documents. As a countermeasure, the CIA began slipping flawed design papers into circulation, making them look like advanced updates, hoping to mislead Soviet engineers. Meanwhile, Vetrov's double life came crashing down. While funneling shuttle data to Moscow, He also passed other classified information to French intelligence. French President François Mitterrand eventually informed Reagan of Vetrov's activities. The KGB discovered his betrayal, arrested him, and executed him in Moscow. By then, however, the damage had been done. Over 3,000 key documents had been acquired, costing the Soviets only about $1 million in today's money, but saving them billions in research and development. Armed with this knowledge, the Soviet space industry went to work. By 1988, they had completed Buran, a shuttle that in some ways outshone NASA's version. Most famously, it was fully automated. In its first and only flight, Buran completed 2 orbits of Earth and returned to a flawless landing without a crew on board, a feat NASA's shuttle never accomplished. On paper, Buran was more capable. It could carry heavier payloads, launch on a more powerful booster, and fly unmanned. Yet politics, not engineering, decided its fate. Just 3 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. The immense costs of maintaining such an ambitious project were unsustainable. Buran was canceled, its factories closed, and its workforce scattered. In 2002, tragedy struck again when the only flown orbiter was destroyed after a hangar roof collapsed at Baikonur. 2 prototypes still exist, abandoned in dusty hangars in Kazakhstan, guarded but often visited by adventurous space enthusiasts who sneak in to catch a glimpse of the ghostly machines. In the end, Buran was both a marvel and a missed opportunity. It showed how far Soviet engineering could go when given the resources and how effective espionage could be in shortening technological gaps. But it also revealed the fragility of Cold War programs, where politics and economics often mattered more than science. NASA's Shuttle fleet would go on to fly for 3 decades, building the International Space Station, deploying satellites, and shaping space exploration. Buran, despite being more advanced in some respects, never flew again after its one triumphant mission. The story of Buran is a reminder of the extremes of the space race. It was not only about rockets and astronauts, but about secrecy, strategy, and the incredible lengths each side went to outdo the other. Born of fear, fueled by espionage, and abandoned by politics, Buran remains one of the most ambitious spacecraft in history. Though it never realized its full potential, its legacy endures as both a cautionary tale and a symbol of the Cold War's relentless push into the stars.